Hi. When white-dominated systems are left unchecked, they often default to perpetuating racism, misogyny, and bigotry. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, commonly referred to as DEI, is not about giving unfair advantages to marginalized groups. They're designed to counteract bias, including nepotism and favoritism, that often occur within dominant groups. For example, while many people believe that affirmative action primarily benefits Black people, studies show that white women often are the largest beneficiaries. This highlights how systems of privilege and power often reinforce themselves, with dominant groups tending to prioritize their own interests over fairness or merit. This whole white nationalist authoritarian push occurring in America right now has got me to thinking, what if the biggest difference between Black Americans and white Americans, generally speaking of course, can be measured in the distance between love and fear? What if something as simple as the burden of fear that comes with retribution is the only thing that stands in the way of white people curing themselves of the curse of hatred and racism? Bear with me. What if I presented my point like this, purely hypothetical? If Barack Obama, on his first day in office, had gone about the business of dismantling any and everything that promotes and maintains white privilege, if Barack Obama on day one began favoring Black people over everyone else with his decisions and policies, and on top of that, had gone about the business of making life much more difficult for other groups of people, specifically white people, more than any other race in the country. If Barack Obama had done all that, do you think that Black people, generally speaking of course, would see this horrific injustice for what it is and rise to the occasion of defiance? Or would they coddle in fear, complacence, or even worse, apathy? Now, if you guess the latter, then you clearly don't know anyone Black. You don't have any Black friends. You've never even had a conversation with a Black person. You certainly don't know your history. I assure you, in the face of such an event, Black people would have stood in solidarity against Obama's hypothetical tyranny. He's representing us, so Black folks would not have stood for that, because we as a people have a moral compass, we have dignity, and we probably wouldn't have even voted for him if we had a hint that he was like that. I assure you, Black people would have led the charge in opposition and gone out of their way to let Barack Obama know that his hypothetical actions are completely out of pocket and he's out of line. Black politicians would have spoken out against him. We'd make him stand on his oath. We'd make him stand on his shit. Now, back to reality, role reversal. Think about the situation that we find ourselves in. Not only are white Americans, generally speaking of course, not standing in solidarity against Donald Trump, they're the main fucking reason why he's back in office in the first place. Hell, they are the main reason where he was even allowed to run again. Triple hell. Millions of them are rooting for him as he burns the country down to the ground right before our eyes. I surmise that is the biggest difference between Black Americans and white Americans. Black people don't have the minute-to-minute constant burden of having to choose between decency and their whiteness, between morality and their whiteness, between fairness and whiteness, between the law and whiteness, between protecting their children from maniacs with pew-pews and their whiteness, between all that is good in this world and losing their precious white privilege. Black Americans, generally speaking of course, have a deeply ingrained moral compass that guides them through life. In other words, Black people are not trying to cut off their nose to spite their face. Black people, for the most part, don't fuck with leopards. We are in this hellscape because white people, generally speaking of course, refuse to evolve and grow and relieve themselves of the burden of whiteness, never once acknowledging the fact that the very thing that they are trying to desperately preserve is having the life choked out of it by their own mental and social incompetence. The very land that they are trying to keep is stolen land. This is land bequeathed to them via their apathy, their cruelty, and their murderous ancestry. The lack of evolution is blatantly obvious because instead of displaying any sense of remorse for their connection to this history and how they directly benefit from this bloody history, they run from the truth. They obfuscate. They cheat and lie and break their own rules. They go out of their way to remove the truth from their history books so as to deliberately deceive their own children, robbing future generations of the simple choice between empathy and apathy. It's fucking crazy. Ironically, the only thing that is going to save this country is the one thing that could have prevented this Trump-stopian fucking nightmare from transpiring in the first place. And that is numbers. The good white people have to outnumber the bad white people. The good white people have to stand up and fight for the future of humanity. The good white people have to stand in solidarity with those of us who wish to make short-lived this reign of white terror that has engulfed our country. Don't just stand by and allow injustices to occur in your face. Don't just stand by and allow black people to be brutally mistreated or worse, unalived. Don't just stand by as Republicans turn back the clock to the saddest and most shameful period in American history. Boycott anti-DEI companies. Urge your elected officials to get rid of Elon Musk. He has no place in our domains of governance. Urge your elected officials to impeach Donald Trump and have him removed from office. Call your elected representatives and demand an independent recount in all swing states based on the very confession of EI stated by Donald Trump himself on the national stage. Demand that they uphold the oath that they made to the Constitution of the United States. Don't render the Constitution just a piece of paper with words on it. At the very least, demand that they restore some semblance of virtue and sanity back to Washington. The idea of Trump is a white power illusion that has gone on way past its expiration date. The political Trump brand shouldn't have even been allowed to go to production, much less have an expiration. Alas, here we are. You want to talk about delusion? Do yourself a favor. Pause this video for a second, go to your web browser, and type in these words. Welcome back. These are world-changing innovations that you benefit from in spite of your deep and visceral hate for black people, despite your constant oppression. Now imagine how much greater your benefits would be if you just let go of your hate. We're being left behind socially, economically, and technologically because as a people, you think and behave like petulant children, unwilling to share the toys in the sandbox. The Chinese don't think like this. The Japanese don't think like this. No one thinks like this. This is strictly an American way of thinking. The ability to deceive ourselves is both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. I know this is cliche, but let go of your hate. It benefits us all. See you on the next post.